Herb talked me into letting a few people in, and now look where we are today. Welcome to Destin. Weather looks a lot like baseball weather last week in Birmingham. We made it through that successfully, so I'm certain we'll navigate the weather here. Just a couple notes. You can count them for yourselves. We have 12 teams in the baseball tournament and 7 hosts. I thought we might have 8, but they really don't ask me my opinion. Proud of all of those. We had 5 teams advance to softball, which ties our own record. I was just watching. I think we got 4 teams in stroke play on women's golf out of La Jolla. So we'll see what finishes today to make the cut to match play. We've got 12 men's teams playing in men's golf later this week and the next week. So a lot of good news, and our track and field speaks for itself. I will note as I traveled down today, it's the first time I think ever since we've been in Destin that Mark Womack's not a part of our meetings. Probably the last time. I just reflect on that, but there have been a couple times during the year after we lost him in October when I was headed to Sea Island for our golf championship on the men's side. Drove over to Augusta, things that were really special to Mark, and he was special to this league. So want to represent him. We do have 4 student athletes. You'll have a chance probably to interact with Champ Anthony from Auburn, Braden Augustus from LSU, Barry Evans, who is our representative to the Division I Student Athlete Advisory Committee. Barry's been here a few times, competing in track and field at the University of Alabama, and Cade Phillips from Texas A&M. They're in a prep session now. We always appreciate their work. If you do travel upstairs and security fails us, you'll see we have graphics that present all the superlatives, so I'll save you from reading what is a page and a half of great things. We've won 7 national championships so far, and we're usually pretty good in the spring. I doubt that any of you are here to talk about any of that. I'm kind of amazed over the weekend, since I had a few rain delays among preparation. If you can overhype a spring meeting, I think that successfully happened based on some of the headlines. We have a lot of issues, plenty of work to do, plenty of opinions. I do not anticipate any decisions on the college football playoff, just so you're clear, so we can tamp that down. We have time. We'll have informed discussion. We're going to invite Rich Clark and his staff to visit with our ADs and our football coaches tomorrow. I know that they've put in a great deal of work to help inform and educate our thinking about the current format and selection process. And then we'll spend time looking at a range of possibilities around the playoff itself, both learning from the successes and then trying to look forward. A lot of discussion about where we are in the oversight of college sports, congressional activity. Obviously had some disruption last week in the House of Representatives. We're attentive to what's happening among some of the Senate leadership. To communicate directly, I haven't signed on to any bills ever that I've never seen. So the notion that there's a bill being worked on and we didn't sign on to a letter of support, that's not an anomaly. Based on my experience, at least outside the Beltway, you don't sign on to things you haven't had a chance to read and digest. So we'll look forward to, if there is something that's developed, the ability to consume what's written, evaluate it from our perspective, evaluate it from the overall college athletics perspective, and then provide feedback. We are encouraged by the amount of work that's taking place, and knowing that people are paying attention to some of the challenges we have. I think you can expect during the week people have opinions on student athlete eligibility. I probably communicated enough on that. I don't need to rehash that. You can ask me on transfer portal management, tampering policies, the age-based eligibility model that's being talked about with the NCAA. I do expect that we'll have conversation about what we do within our authority as a conference. Again, as I look at like the overhyped pieces, it's not new that we would have our own set of rules as a league. Those of you who've been here, my first one was 2003. I can remember years when we had like 35 different rule proposals that would be considered. and be more restrictive on the Southeastern Conference by comparison to others. And we'll go back into that conversation as we look to address some of the challenges. So with that, see how orderly we can manage this process. Ralph.
Hi, Greg.
Welcome to Destin.
Thank you.
Mets are struggling.
Much
Maybe there's hope in Syracuse for them, but I don't know.
What do you hope to accomplish this week regarding the college football playoff with the internal conversations you're going to have? Do you want to have consensus of some sort coming out of this?
I don't think consensus is needed. I'd start first, and we did this at the beginning of the month with our athletics directors. There's a clear set of communications from me on why we are where we are, some reminders about the process, and education about really all we've looked at. So we've looked at, back in the 4 days, we looked at all kinds of models. I've seen others haven't spent time on models. We'll look at a variety of ideas, but really look at the process for how we'd come to conclusion, whether it's remaining at 12 or some other number. It's really important from my perspective, and if I look at my notes, because I wrote out elements of what needs to be understood. I said this those of you who were in Las Colinas, when we went from 4 to 12, remember the old days when the first thing you'd be asked about is the health of the participants, the number of games. This kind of got lost. So we want to have the right kind of conversations about health, recovery, preparation of student athletes. We need to understand the marketplace. December and January are crowded months relative to football, particularly on days where you'd be seeking to play college football games in a playoff that could be expanded. What happens in the regular season, I've talked about that before. And I think part of our educational effort is understanding the selection process now. So if we came out with better understanding of that information, when new information may be available to inform a decision, the decision-making timeline, both internally and for the college football playoff, that would be a productive use of time.
Greg,
Brandon.
I was just going to follow up real quick on that. Are you happy with any of the changes maybe you saw from your studies after, I guess, the introduction of the new strength metric, or whatever you want to call it, the committee and the tool they were able to use to pick teams in the playoff?
I don't know that I know enough. I just was at Cortland State with my measurement and evaluation professor who's retired. I was speaking at commencement, and I said, look, probably didn't pay as much of attention there as I should have. And so my statistical analysis knowledge is based on continual learning, and I'm going to engage in continual learning this week to see if I can better answer that question someday. I think the generalities provided to me were helpful a year ago. I think there was progress made. How it's used is part of the learning process, and then help our membership understand the metrics better will be another good use of our time.
Could you give us a little insight, Greg, into quantifying the value of the regular season and how an expanded playoff would affect that? It seems to be a fairly nebulous thing.
Oh, sure. We've done some of that work, yeah. And Pete, go back when we went from 4 to 12. At 4, you'd have teams effectively eliminated from postseason consideration in September, and good teams. And as we worked on the working group to move from 4 to 12, the analysis was, if you looked over time, what kind of teams were brought into the conversation. I think there were 2 ways to group it, and you have to go back like pre-COVID when this work started, pre-21, 22, the pre-expansion era. And so you had, 5 conferences plus 1. So you'd have those 5 conferences who was around their championship games that had access through the conference champion, and then with the group of 6, you had actually a group of 5 then, a group of 6 now. You had a multiplicity. Each of those conferences had 2 or 3 or 4 programs vying for a conference championship. How might it sort itself out? And then what we did is we looked further to say, okay, in the months of November, the whole "it just means more" thing is real, so our games have always mattered. But would there be additional attention? And I would quantify Oklahoma last year as a really good example where in the old 4-team format, that's a team that's out. November 1st last year. I think that was a Saturday they played up in Knoxville. Had a really tough schedule. So for all the discussion about 9-game and the difficulty of our schedule, that's a really good example of a difficult schedule in November helping a team earn its way into the playoff. And so what we've done is looked at those games that matter at a higher level all the way through. As you expand, there are games that mattered at a certain level that don't matter the same way. I'll give the example I've used before. Buffalo Bills fan, Josh Allen has a starting streak. They're playing the Jets last week of the season. He takes a snap and leaves. Jets are done. Bills are locked into a wild card. We don't really experience that in college football. And that happens over and over and over in the playoff-based NFL model. And so when you start to quantify, you look at a certain number. What are games that may have mattered at a smaller number under the scarcity principles of 12? These games, all of those games are high leverage games for Oklahoma, where you go to 24 and maybe one or two of those games don't matter in the same way. Rivalry games will matter, I would argue, but hey, if you've got somebody that needs to rest because they're in at 24, those are the things that we want to try to understand. I think you can quantify that because we've done some of that work for our own purposes. Did I answer that question?
I guess just the regular season has such extreme value. Is there a way to say, okay, if we're going to add some of these games, like we're comfortable with some of that taken away? That's where I.
Yeah, is there a cutoff line? And I think you can see that. You can see that now in 12, where really it was additive. We've not had circumstances, and we have a relatively small sample size, but we looked at the numbers when we were building the model of games that are brought into consideration. And I forget all that data. That's where I did pay enough attention, but memory goes. What's the tipping point there? And we've used examples from professional sports. When professional sports have added to their postseason, it's always been a small adjustment. 4 to 12 was monumental, but I think it was justifiable. And you want to be careful about how far you go. And that's understanding the competitive impacts. And maybe you bring more teams into the conversation. And you make a judgment, because that's what I think you'd have to do, that, hey, a game that may not have that same type of leverage, if you will, or that same type of value because both teams could be in, that's minimal, but the ability to bring more teams into the conversation that would have been out creates value in the regular season. Some of that you can quantify to the essence of your question. Some of that, it strikes me as a matter of judgment.
Frank, as you've most of the feedback that we've heard on the 24.
So much for the orderly process.
Oh, sorry.
I tried. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Pete's the one who didn't raise his hand first.
Okay,
though.
sorry, that's on me. I'm number 2.
No, it's on Pete.
Okay.
Because Ralph was orderly, Brandon was quick, and I was looking at him, so I made eye contact.
Yeah, most of the feedback that we've got from our audience when the 2014 playoff comes up is pretty wildly negative. One, what do you make of that dynamic from the fans? And two, how much is that a consideration as you guys try to wrestle with what you would like to see in the future?
My opinion. So whenever I say I think that, you have to understand it's opinion. I think that merits paying attention. Now, that's not a scientific survey. That's who's ever in the moment. I don't know what the filtering mechanism is. Can you vote 10 times? Can you vote once? So it's not like it's scientific research. It's kind of mass opinions. I don't disregard it, but that also shouldn't be necessarily the primary force. It's a piece of information to me. Nicole, you're here.
Yes, I am.
The other guys met last week. Oh, we can laugh, can't we?
I was on my honeymoon.
Oh, congrats. Oh, here? Okay. That's a better answer.
We're coming into this week. Where does the SEC's stance on?
So you're missing your anniversary?
I hit it last week.
Okay.
And now I can be here.
My first anniversary was at the Mariner Restaurant in Natchitoches, Louisiana. When we were married in November of '88, I never thought that my first anniversary dinner would be. I figured it'd be in Utica, New York.
I'll probably never be at ACC spring meetings.
Okay.
Because of the anniversary.
Yeah.
Having to feel better.
I understand.
What's the SEC's relationship with its championship game? How committed is or important is that piece to whatever the postseason changes, maybe
We have contracts, so it's pretty committed.
beyond that or philosophically? 'Cause
Yeah, pretty committed. Pat was first.
Over the course of a period of months, have come on board or favored a 24-team playoff. Has the reasoning been communicated to you? Did that surprise you at all? The kind of the evolution?
No, nothing surprises me. I take that back. There are things that still surprise me, but not that stuff. You know, when we went from 4 to 12, remember we were out in Santa Clara. I remember so vividly. I was the detractor, or we were. We weren't looking for expansion. And then when it came time to vote, we got 3 conferences that flipped. That you can go find the quotes where, hey, we need to expand. So the fact that people are maneuvering back and forth is not surprising to me. And you'll hear here, people have opinions. What I've encouraged them to do is to fulfill our leadership responsibility to understand before we commit. Don't just pick a number. So remember last year when we were here, the focus was all on 16 with AQs. That was it. And we dug in and I shared some metrics that we use to inform our position. I think that's the kind of leadership behavior we want this week. That doesn't mean people here won't have opinions, but we don't just leap to a decision, which is why my opening remarks indicated we'll spend time hearing and learning without making a decision at this point, because part of what we have is time. And even to the question about championship games, you know, we have time for decisions about that. Are we committed? We started, and nobody followed immediately. It did over time. And it set us apart. So that's not something you just walk away from because in the moment there's a little bit of pressure. You want to be thoughtful about how you do that. And I take that back to our view of the playoff. I don't know how other people inform their perspectives. You know, one of the conference meetings I saw one day a commitment to this number and the next day a report why it wouldn't work. I'd like to avoid that kind of thing. Yep.
When you were on the original working group going from 2 to 4,
I was not on that group.
I thought you were one of the authors of the.
No, I was just a simple associate commissioner. I'd be.
4 to 12, right?
Bullsby, Craig Thompson.
That was 4 to 12.
Okay, that, yeah.
2 to 4 was what, like?
Mike Slag, Jim Delaney, and Blantz.
Okay.
There were spreadsheets too. I saw the spreadsheets, and somehow Oresco was at the door trying to get in. So don't use that one, please. He's up in Idaho.
Everyone's welcome to use mine.
That working group, and I remember reporting that you guys had talked about so many models, and I was curious if back then, did you even consider 16 and 24 at that time?
I don't think we ever considered 24 per se. 16, yeah. But understand, like the memory loss in our society is magnificent. So the question was, what would be a format for the future, which would have been this year? And then can you start earlier with that format? That was the charge. And Jack, Bob, Craig, myself, I think it was really good work to look at all kinds of things. We had 5, we had 6, we had 8, we had 12. I think I've used the Saturday Night Live Change Bank skit reference in here. You know, you want change for a 20? We can give you 2 10s. We can give you 4 5s. We can give you 10 and 2 5s. How do you make your money? Volume, right? You can go back and Google that one. And that's what happened. Is there's a lot of numbers out there. We had the Mike Leach 64 idea that was part of it. We had 32. I think it goes back to some of the principles that I listed, like the impact on the participants. When do you play the games? What's the impact on the regular season? I think values and principles, whether it's 12, 16, 20, 24, 28, 29, 32, 37, whatever the number is, ought to still be the center of the conversation. And I thought that was really good work. Now, why did we end up at 12? Anybody remember why we ended up at 12? Some of the reasons? Check the memory loss. And
Keep the regular season relevant at the end by adding buys to make the
Value
championship
of
games matter.
Build for 5 power
Build for
leagues,
5
so
power
we
leagues.
Yeah.
Yeah. So 6 AQs.
So it became 4.
it's funny how specific this is. No, one of the big factors, we all had existing contracts for bowl games, both in the CFP and outside the CFP. So if you went beyond 12, you were disrupting your other contractual relationships. I mean, there was a lot there. So the reason I played like, let me ask you questions, man, someday that's going to be fun whenever I get that
I don't
chance.
remember anything either.
Yeah, well, I've got a list. Part of the reason I asked you a question is there was never one variable that was, we're going to expand just because of this. That was never inherent. There were a set of issues that were part of the presentations that informed the decision making.
So my follow-up question to that though is, how much has the changing landscape in college athletics changed your perception on why more is the right number now? Whether it is.
Well, first of all, my view from the beginning is there shouldn't be any AQs, period. That hasn't changed. My view was, so somebody's going to ask me the question about my responsibility for national policy, not just the conference. We didn't need to go beyond 4. And we still would be the only conference to have a team in the 4 ever since this thing was expanded. I think what we saw, the onset of 12 was actually incredibly well timed because of the changes that happened around player movement, arguably around some name, image, and likeness activity. Probably some retirements too, or movements to the NFL. And so that brought people in. Now, where are the limits? Where are the boundaries, and why? What are the reasons? I don't know that my principles have changed. I think the environment has changed. So how do you use those principles in a changed environment to make an informed decision? I think it's much the same approach, and that doesn't predict an outcome, but it informs a decision. Yep.
So you mentioned last year at this time, 16 was the number. Well, one thing that has changed is the number of conference games. Had you known that the CFP was going to stick at 12, would your opinion have changed on increasing the number of conference games?
Mine would not have. In fact, I'm pretty sure if you go back, because people quote things back to me, our need to make a decision about our football schedule and the decision about the size of the college football playoff format were always out of sync. So the playoff decision could go to December 1st. We couldn't wait that long to make an 8 or 9 game decision, really out of respect for non-conference games that we were going to have to adjust. And so the potential was there. Would I have preferred 16? Sure. But what we have now is a schedule model where in 21, when we expanded, and even going back to 18 pre-expansion, the words fairness and balance were always mentioned. What are the priorities for our schedule? Fairness and balance. Well, what does fairness mean? It means everybody has a similar win-loss percentage embedded in their opponents in their schedule. And the second is we want to see teams on an equitable rotation, which was a move away from divisions. What we'll have this year and next is every one of our teams will play every opponent at least once. And over 4 years, our fans will see in their stadium every one of our teams. And I think that's incredibly healthy for the Southeastern Conference. I think it's great for college football. I think it's great for our fans. And it's hard for our coaches, and I get why they want expansion, and we'll keep working on that. I've never said, even last year, that we're opposed to some number other than 16. I've told my colleagues that. I'm not an opponent of 24 or 28. We have to inform the decision making. And I think we did a good job informing our position last year on 16. We'll consider other ideas, certainly this week and moving forward. Yep.
Greg, if the Big Ten won't agree to 16, do you have a sense of your membership's comfort at staying at 12?
It varies. I don't think that you can say, you go back to the move from 4 to 12, we never had a unanimous vote. I don't think we'd have a unanimous vote right now on a number.
Greg, there's obviously some consternation over the CSC and the way that is operated so far, whether it's your league or elsewhere. I guess, do you feel like your schools are still committed to that enterprise at the moment? And if so, if not, do you feel like
I don't think those questions or positions are mutually exclusive. The level of innovation, if you will, that's taken place in the last 12 months is pretty remarkable, since this kind of oversight's never existed. And so you've seen oversight that now exists. And recall, third-party name, image, and likeness activity wasn't a House settlement outcome. That was a state law outcome. And so I do think there's sometimes an error in understanding the why. So if we hadn't resolved the House case, or that hadn't been authorized, you'd still have third-party name, image, and likeness activity. There'd just be no oversight. So now there's oversight. Whenever there's oversight, there will be complaints. Right? Can we agree? Like, whenever there's oversight. I think we even got complaints about automatic balls and strikes, and that's pretty well defined. And so to kind of tie your question together, yeah, is there frustration? Sure. But there's innovation that's taken place. There is oversight. There are imperfections, and we're going to work to try to help address those imperfections. Are people committed to it? They're part of this process, and I think Ross reported a bunch of numbers that show, yeah, our folks are committed to it, unlike maybe some others, as this information is being reported. And we've encouraged them to continue along that path.
Obviously, a lot of that money's sort of stuck in limbo, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Some of the money.
To that end,
Yeah.
does there need to be a 1 year, or amnesty, or whatever you want to call it, I guess?
I wouldn't respond to that in the press conference. We need to learn. We need to learn from the experiences of the past few months and the past year. And as I indicated, a lot of innovation. States had laws that talked about oversight, right? And I don't know of any state oversight. So we do have to remind ourselves of why we're here. And it's not simply because of the existence of the College Sports Commission. Cedric?
Is there consternation, or is there, I mean,
It's the third time that word's been used in this press conference. So yes, there's consternation.
are there 24 teams capable of winning a national championship in any year? And the watering down concept, is that a concern?
It is for me. There is consternation. And that's back to kind of Pete's question about what can you quantify, how do you understand? And you know what? Pick a number. So let's go to the NCAA basketball. Next year, there will be the first four out, and those first four will be angry. This year, we were at 12, and we had a couple programs angry. I think good teams, angry that they weren't in the top 12. If we go to 24, we've run the metrics, and we had an outside company do it, so this is not SEC bias. And, you know, you look at teams 22, 23, 24, 25, 26. Like, along that continuum, 3 are going to get in, 22, 23, 24, and 2 are going to get left out. And sometimes our teams will get in, and sometimes our teams will be left out. And you know what? There'll be angry people about that. Now, in this environment, I think whoever asked me the question about things changing, I think one of the things that's changed is there are a lot more people putting economic heft behind teams, expecting an outcome. That's not driven by court decisions per se, or settlements, or the CSC, or the format size. There's just higher expectations because there's more people touching our teams directly. I think there are limits to that, and that kind of goes back to evaluating what's the right threshold for teams that can compete at a level high enough to win a national championship. And understand there's a lot that goes into that too. I've never thought football's a tournament sport. And, you know, I'm not the greatest football mind out there. You can read social media, people communicate about that. But, you know, football's not, you know, an 8-week tournament sport. Staying in the great state of Texas.
Tony Petit said there haven't even had talks about 16. Does that bother you? Do y'all still talk? And
Yeah, we talk. Yeah. I was surprised by that, since they brought 16 to the table.
right.
When we were meeting last year, all those 16 ideas, they weren't ours. I think probably some of the outcome. So I think there's probably clarity that they have looked at 16, just not much of late.
Does that kind of suggest there's no room, wiggle room, that's gonna be 12 or 24?
But he'd have to explain their positioning. And I think our responsibility here, I'll speak to the Southeastern Conference, the leadership responsibility is to look at a lot of alternatives. And Heather, you asked about when we did the work, nobody would have picked 12. In fact, there were probably people in this room who, when we said 12 in June of 21, were like, 12? And then as you process the why, it made a lot more sense. So I think our responsibility, and we'll spend some time with our membership on that, is just to kind of look at the spectrum of possibility and kind of the rationale behind certain
Do
alternatives.
y'all feel like the last holdout, and does that bother you?
It doesn't bother me. People tell me that, but, you know, I don't know if you pay attention in college sports, positions seem to change a lot. So whether I am or not, I am what I am. Mike, you've been patient here in front.
Yeah, with the lack of activity in Congress, there's been some leadership that's talked about the SEC establishing their own rules. There was talk about that in the Big Ten as well. Will there be discussion on that this week? And
Every time we come here, to my reference of my last 20 plus years, we talk about our own rules. So the fact we're talking about our own rules isn't anything new. I think what you're hearing is the expression of frustration about the lack of progress. And I'll go back to March 6th. I was in the White House, and I spoke about the need for national standards. We still believe we need national standards. If those can't be achieved, then we'll have to look at more conference-led regulation. That's the reality we're facing. When we've got football players or basketball players 6, 7, 8, 9 years, we want a collegiate going model. We want a college sports model. And there's a lot of work to that.
to the extent you couldn't do anything quickly, I mean, I know the University of Georgia's president was talking about running out of time, can't go another year, craving rules. You don't think, would that be something that could be implemented sooner than later?
Our rules? Sure, we're going to vote on some this week. Here's my bylaws. We have a 3-week notice process. So we're going to change our bylaws, 3 weeks of notice. We can change our bylaws. Now we have to have rationale and legal defenses for that, but I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, we understand how to change rules.
Your bylaws that you're talking about here, one of them you just mentioned, maybe a 5 for 5 or however long.
I didn't say 5 for 5.
Okay. You said.
I said eligibility rules. We shouldn't be 6, 7, 8, 9 years.
So that's one. What are some other bylaws that you might think about as it relates to possibly?
Oh,
NIL?
we'll think about them.
You're not willing to share those?
No.
Great.
Yep.
So much talk about the CFP and format. Do you think the calendar needs to change before you guys coalesce on a CFP format? Because your coaches this week will talk about CFP, but they're also going to talk heavily about.
Yeah, no, I think they're right. I remember another one of those quaint observations during the expansion from 4 to 12 was we need a holistic solution for the football calendar. Looks a whole lot like it did before when the vote went from no to yes. And I think our coaches are right that things need to change. Now, observing things need to change, and then leading and implementing the change are different things. So we'll engage in depth. I think we have Craig Bowl here to talk about some of the ideas that the AFCA's introduced and maybe some of the rationale there, and then we'll see where that goes.
Would you
Now,
like to see week 1 move to week 0?
yeah, I've never been a big fan of that. I think Labor Day is a good start. I think that the trend line is, well, we talked to our coaches. In fact, I said this in some interview. When we met with our coaches in February, they felt strongly that having 2 open weeks within the season was important. So you're either moving later or earlier. And nobody really wants to move later. So you're moving earlier, which is the week 0. So that'll be a topic of conversation again. And that's where, I was disappointed not to have outreach from the AFCA before their statement, because their suggestion ran counter to the really deep conversation we had with our coaches, which was start week 0 but use that for the postseason rather than 2 open weeks. And our communication was about the 2 open weeks.
do one more. He's gonna kinda save something for the rest of the week.
Who's ever sitting next to Kirk? I can't. Oh, I got new glasses, but
That's all right. David Hale, ESPN.
sorry, David.
You talked about talk about rules here every year, and it seems to me that there's plenty of people who want to come up with rules. That the bigger issue is the enforcement of rules, or schools and programs agreeing to comply by whatever rules are out there. Do you have a sense that whether it be the CSC, some national program, or the SEC in particular creating their own governance, that there would be enough buy-in and an enforcement structure that would allow those rules to work?
Yeah, I think there's more context. So yeah, people have to have buy-in. People have to have buy-in. People, schools, campuses, coaches have to want to be governed. Period. But that governance system has to keep up with the change that's happening around it. And the old model, the current model, I'd guess, is we entrust the NCAA to oversee certain things, like eligibility is a part of that. I don't remember having 9-year eligibility conversations in like 2018. We had COVID, which for a defined period of time extended eligibility, and now it's just multiplied. And you look at transfers, right? Why are transfer rules the way they are? We had a court decision. Can you ever govern that again? And that court decision is an indication of people observing there were inconsistencies about how the NCAA managed those waivers, right or wrong. We have that with hardship waivers. We have that with, does a season of eligibility count? And so there is a need to be willing to be governed, but that governance system has to attach itself to an updated reality. And there are things that we cared about years ago. Like I can remember processing, because we used to give the reports here, like buying glitter for gymnasts was a violation of NCAA rules 15 years ago. I don't think the system has moved far enough away for the glitter being a violation, more towards what are the key issues about which we should care. And you think about tampering. Tampering used to be, like I asked in January of this year, somebody tell me the rule that defines what is tampering, and it's impermissible contact. That is an indication of a set of policies that haven't been updated to keep up with the culture in which we're in. Like, what is impermissible contact? And so I was actually encouraged when Charlie Baker joined us in March, so this was on the aftermath of the Big Ten letter. Brett and Jim issued statements kind of counter, and we had a conversation about, hey, this system needs to update itself. And tampering and how transfers are managed are a part of that. And so there's some folks doing, I think, some healthy work on that. I think it's important to have outcomes and get to that outcome quickly. But David, I would note that, yep, people have to want to be governed, but the governing system has to be able to attach itself to the realities and focus on the priorities, maybe not the way enforcement was done 20 years ago. Because remember, when you think about enforcement, having been involved in that for a period of time, whenever there was a working group to look at how to enforce rules, the first answer was always, we need tougher penalties. And you can go back to, there's the Duff report, there's a presidential committee at the university, they all said that. And I started 15 years ago saying, well, wait a second. You can have as tough a penalty as you want, and if it's applied 5 years down the road, that's not a penalty at all. And so maybe what we need is less aggressive penalties and more timely enforcement. What's happened over the last 5 years causes me to think the younger me was exactly right. And that accountability falling to individuals directly would be a healthy pivot. There's a lot to the question that's, yep, it's about being willing to be governed, but it's the context of that governance that matters as well.
In fairness, glitter is annoying.
Yeah. I could give you the tuna fish sandwich to a volunteer coach, one too. And you kind of think back, like the stuff that we were attentive to, that, yeah, quaint's one word, petty is another. But, and it's hard for me. I mean, you learn about heuristics, ways of thinking. What we're dealing with is historic change. And I have to check myself on this all the time. So if you want like a confession, somebody can tweet this. Having to move from a system that was seen as working pretty well, not perfectly. By the way, show me the perfect system. Show me the perfect system to oversee college sports for all the criticism. But to move away from that system that worked well into something much different has been a healthy exercise. But those of us that knew the then and the now have to constantly check ourselves, not just to go back to the old way of thinking. And that kind of transition in leadership is challenging. Part of the reason you want to be a leader is to meet the challenges, but that part of leadership is challenging for us. That's an honest observation about what's happening in college sports.
Thank you.
I don't know what you'll do with that, but